We're clear for takeoff.
Hello again, once again, it is the Kings of the Heart. My name is Tyreek Omari Walton. This is the podcast you turn to for all those therapeutic solutions. I'm going to say that today. I'm going to steal that one for today. Therapeutic solutions for relationships. And I say that because we have a guest on today. He is a LCPC and an LCADC, meaning he is a counselor, he is a therapist, he is a brother therapist, and there are so few of us, as you know, and so we like to connect with them as often as possible, but this is a friend as well as a colleague. He is Mr. Deon Brown of DJBTherapeuticSolutions.com. You can check him out there, and we'll get more into how you can find out about him later on, but I want to bring him on today because we are going to talk about spiritual intimacy. And if you know this brother, then you know about his outreach I'm gonna let him break it down a little bit more, because this brother's out there speaking, he is touring, he is doing a lot of work in the community across the country. Every time I talk to him, he's traveling somewhere, and a lot of it has a basis in the church. And so I want him to come on and talk a little bit about that. But today we are going to break down what spiritual intimacy is in a way that you haven't heard before. All right, so here he is, Mr. Deon Brown. Mr. Brown, how you doing, sir?
I'm well, sir.
Good.
I'm glad to be here on the podcast to talk about such an important subject.
I have to tell people, I've actually been on Deon's podcast a couple of times. So it's great to be able to flip the script and have him here with the Kings of the Heart. So welcome, brother. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us real quick a little bit about some of the work that you do with the church and how it relates to the work that you do with your clients.
Sure. So in addition to being a licensed clinician, I also serve as an associate pastor and have been for some time at my local church in Baltimore. And so for me, I tend to do a lot of integration of mental health and spirituality. So whether I'm in a pulpit preaching or teaching or doing some sort of workshop or seminar, in a church setting, then I do a lot of awareness and integration for people in the spirituality framework. I do identify as a Christian myself. However, I speak and do work with people from a broad array of spirituality backgrounds and respectful of who they are and their spirituality and their traditions. That translates into my individual one-on-one work with my clients, because my clients, some of my clients also are, Christians, and those that want to, I can integrate mental health and spirituality from a Christian framework in my one-to-one work with them. But then I have clients who, are not, don't identify as Christian. They may, identify a broad array of either religious, I generally say either a particular religious tradition or some sort of spirituality framework, because some of my clients don't connect with maybe a particular religious tradition, but they may have their own sense of what spirituality is and means to them,
right,
and for them. So, right. Yeah.
How does that change from client to client when you're working with one client with more of a Christian base and then with someone who has a broader base? How does the conversation differ, if at all?
Sure. One of the questions that when I first start working with a client, and for a lot of us as clinicians, we've been trained to do an initial assessment of biopsychosocial. I do a biopsychosocial spiritual.
Okay.
So with that framework, meaning I do take some time to unpack and dissect with my clients. One of my general questions from the beginning, I will say, are you connected to a particular religious tradition or spirituality framework? So that can vary from client to client.
I would imagine.
Some of my clients will say, yes, I am this, or I am this, or I grew up this. But
right.
some people go through a crisis of faith where they get older and they change or they make a transition for whatever reason. So I will, I'll just work with them. My graduate school program was great because it was a mixture in the sense that it gave us the foundation with the behavioral sciences, but it taught us how to recognize our own spirituality in our work with our clients, but also how to work with clients from wherever their spirituality was or is,
right.
And I have clients who have no type of connection to any sort of religious tradition or spirituality as well. So
right.
we just work with our clients out of kind of where they are and what that means to them.
Right. I'm really curious because when you think about, let's just say, the Christian faith and issues around sex and sexuality, there's always a little something behind it, that represses, that people repress, right? So when you're working with someone and they're coming from a Christian faith and you're working with them specifically, through that lens, what are the conversations like when it comes to intimacy?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's right.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's a packed question right there.
Let's unpack it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to think about where to start with that one because I've had a lot of different situations and cases. Let me just say this. And, let me say, because I am in both worlds, being both, clinician and associate pastor, and a few people know my name out in the community and what I do in both sides.
Man, everybody know your name, but go ahead. It's fine. You can be as humble as you want to. That's fine.
No, sometimes I get into trouble.
Good.
I get into trouble.
Good. We like trouble around here.
I get into trouble sometimes in the religious communities, particularly because my training has taught me to see so much. Again, while I definitely identify as a Christian, but my training has taught me to see so much as a lot as gray.
Right.
And it's kind of tough because I've had the conversation with a number of clients where basically because of their upbringing and teachings from their particular church or religious organization, where they had very challenging thoughts, feelings, and reactions to issues around sex and sexuality. And that's me being very general at this point.
Right.
It's a lot of kind of what that can mean. But I will say this to me. I will say this. This will be my bordering on getting in trouble statement. I will say this statement. I think for so long, I can only speak again. I'll speak from like a Judeo-Christian standpoint. I can't speak about this in some other major religious traditions, et cetera. But from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, a lot of people grew up with just seeing sex and human sexuality matters as bad or negative or wrong.
Right.
So I think the picture a lot of times for people has just only been painted one way. Right. So that's part of the work sometimes we have to do with people in and I'm sure we'll get more specific as we go along. That's part of the work that we have to do with people with kind of untangling some of that.
Yeah. It's interesting for me because I practice Buddhism, and my practice aligns very well with my clinical practice as well. Just in terms of the mindfulness and the intention and everything. And then, but of course, especially being in this area, I work with a lot of people who come from a more, like you said, Judeo-Christian background. And there's not really a conflict there, but like you have to have conversations that may come into conflict with the beliefs that they have or the way that they practice their beliefs, just to open them up to other possibilities that may be interfering with the way that they're developing their relationships or interacting with their mates. And and we're not just talking about, especially when you start talking about people who aren't married, so you have this particular religious faith that you're practicing and you're trying to abide by its principles, but then you have these other more earthly, situations, interactions that you're having with your mate. and the conflict that comes from that. Even to the point where people will, let's say, for example, begin to have sexual relations with their mate early on as they're dating, but now as they're moving closer to getting married, they want to stop. We're going to stop. We're going to not do any of that until after we actually get married. And you see the things that kind of develop during that period of time in terms of, for some people, they feel like they become closer because they're not basing their interactions and the basis of the relationship on sex. For some other people, you see the conflict because that's all the relationship was actually based on. And now as they're trying to grow closer into a deeper relationship, they realize that there's a lot less there than they thought, and they were basing the way that they're connecting strictly on how their bodies connect.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and generally, and definitely most Judeo-Christian mainstream cultures and society, the idea is abstinence until marriage.
Right.
Concerning, obviously that's a because we're natural human beings, and we tend to live in a very sexualized society, and so it is
pretty much
tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It is a tough one for people.
Yeah.
So I think years ago maybe there might have been a higher percentage of numbers of people who actually made it to the finish line abstinence geared before marriage,
right.
or no sex before marriage years ago. I think those numbers are dwindling more and more today.
Right. Well, so are the number of people who actually practice the faith.
Yeah. Correct. That's true. That's true. Absolutely. And one of the things you said, which is so true, just the, even with that area, with kind of connectedness and romance and sex and sexuality, you can have people who, kind of practice that differently. Okay. One partner could be like, no, I'm not engaging in any sort of sexual activity with you at all before we get married. And they could be, hardcore steadfast on that. And the other partner could adopt a posture like, well, we'll try, and no, seriously. And that has happened. So that produces sometimes a conflict among couples. Like, what do you mean you'll try?
Right.
Well, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. So that's a realistic. You get, and those two people could both identify as Christians per se, and that will be that their posture in reference to that issue may be different. The boundaries and the limits.
Right. I mean, people practice their faith differently. You may come from a very similar tradition, but the way that you practice may be different. And people will find reasons for practicing the way that they practice, and it may not align perfectly with the way that you practice. And that brings us right into, talk about a segue, that brings us right into the ideas behind spiritual intimacy. Because when we usually talk about intimacy overall, people's minds usually go right to sexual intimacy.
Oh, absolutely.
And in my practice, I'm often bringing clients along to understand that there are different areas of intimacy beyond sexual. Even within physical intimacy, sexual intimacy is only a small part of it. You still have the massaging, the touching, the hand holding, just a physical connection beyond just sexual sex, right? Then you have emotional intimacy. And these are things that we've talked about on the podcast many times before. But you have emotional intimacy, you have intellectual intimacy, and you also have spiritual intimacy. And when I talk to clients around spiritual intimacy, I often like to come from the standpoint that you don't have to share the same faith. And even if you do share the same faith, that you may not practice your faith the same way. Those aren't the most significant points about spiritual intimacy. What about for you? When you do begin to get into conversations around intimacy, particularly spiritual intimacy, how do you come at it, and how do you break that down for your clients to better understand it?
So something you said, which is so interesting and true. So
I get that a lot. Thank you.
No, it's fine. One of the, when we talk about, again, just primarily speaking from Judeo-Christian standpoint. I have clients who are, part of various Islamic sects, as well as clients who may practice some of the Yoruba and some of the other African traditions. In some, I'll say this, even when you look at like Christianity, there's a lot of different denominations, right?
Right.
So the denominations, you have non-denominational, but then you have a whole bunch of other denominational frameworks. There are some differences when you're talking about practicing and what that looks like. There are some differences in how that is practiced, or even how like the worship is practiced, or the services, or things like that.
Right.
Now, there are some branches of Christianity that very strongly support the notion of not being with anyone else who is not a Christian.
Right. Yep. Oh, I've run across that a lot around here.
Yeah. I'm being measured with my words. Trust me. So
hey, man, speak your mind. Speak your mind. I've been there.
No, I'm going to. I'm just creating the framework for it. And so that that can so first you will have some people who identify as Christians, and maybe with dating a mate, or choosing a mate, or electing or going out with somebody, they might particularly search out another Christian only, so or maybe not. And then sometimes those sort of conversations come up in session for them, and it's with counseling the clients, it's really about, for me, it's always about what they want, their goals. I've had clients, for example, I have clients particularly seek me out because they've Googled me and found out, and I'm a therapist, but the other spirituality stuff. So they were like, because of where the framework that they came out of,
right?
They wanted somebody who could understand them and their particular spiritual faith or tradition. Right. I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but because he's going into a lot now.
Right. Well, I mean, again, just thinking about spiritual intimacy, how would you define what spiritual intimacy is?
Okay, gotcha. So, okay, well, I think let me ask you this question. Are you talking about in general between couples, or just a general definition? Just
a general definition, because I think the definition will carry over to whether you're working with individuals or with couples. So the idea is, okay, so when we come at spiritual intimacy, different from the other kinds of intimacy, but understanding that intimacy overall is how you build your bonds and how you maintain the bonds between people. And you're going to have these conversations in your individual sessions as well as with couple sessions. When you think about spiritual intimacy by itself, isolated from isolated from the emotional, the physical, and the intellectual, yet knowing they all blended together, they're all reliant upon each other, they're all interrelated. But when you just isolate spiritual intimacy by itself, how do you see it? How do you define that?
So I think spiritual intimacy in a nutshell, it can be about we'll define it as generally like closeness, connection, and discipline to connect to one's spirituality or one's belief in God, but also it's like mutual strengths as well as shared connections.
Right.
When we talk about with people.
Right. Yeah. When I get into spiritual intimacy with my clients, I usually come from a place that you don't have to share the same religious faith and religious background in order to strengthen your spiritual intimacy. Because like you said, you may have people who are suffering a crisis in faith, even though they came from a particular background. I mean, I've seen in session where people have admitted that they no longer practice a particular faith and their mate didn't know. Right. So now here you are, your faith that you were basing your relationship around is no longer for one person, at least a significant part of who they are. Yeah. So how do you maintain that sense of spiritual intimacy, which is essential, I think, for a healthy relationship? How do you maintain that spiritual intimacy, that bond, if you guys aren't practicing the same faith? So you have to look outside of there. So what are the elements that actually go into having a spiritually intimate relationship with somebody that's not based in sharing the same exact faith? And so I started thinking about that. So one of the main things are, okay, you may have different faiths, But what about your guiding principles? The principles may not be identical, but do they lead you down the same path?
Yeah.
Right. So when you think about religion, when you think about spirituality, typically they're frameworks for how to live your life.
True.
Well, are you living your life in a very similar way despite the different practices or the different belief systems? So
Yep.
you want to take that into account. Also, just a common ideology. So again, you may not have the same exact faith, but in terms of how you see the world, how you see how people, work in the world and who people are in the world and how you are in the world, having a common ideology, if not the same faith. And one
of the things with my graduate program, it was there was a pastoral counseling framework.
Okay.
The graduate program that I graduated from, believe it or not, was actually very sort of Roman Catholic oriented.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And,
wow. Really?
Yeah, and a lot of priests and nuns as far as the instructors as well. But one of the great things I got out of, and we were in classes with the people from a bunch of different religious faiths and traditions. I think one of the classes we had to take was religious worldviews.
Okay.
And in either that class or another class, we had to get up in front of all 40-something of our classmates and articulate our spiritual or religious upbringing, background, belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. One of the gentlemen, he was, oh my goodness, let's see, he wasn't, he was Hinduism.
Okay.
There we go.
Right.
Hinduism.
Okay.
So he had us, the class, sing, we did some sort of Hare Krishna song, some sort of song or chant, I think. That was interesting.
That was sure, right. A little bit different from what you used to, I'm sure.
Absolutely. But one of the things we got out of that whole series of classes, spirituality is also about finding out with people, and certainly with clients or groups, what is it, or talking about similarities, because if we say, okay, I'll say it this way, for clients who are open to this, because there are some clients who are not open to the idea at all.
Oh yeah.
That they can date or marry somebody who doesn't have all of their particular religious background, traditions, etc. You probably come in contact with some people
plenty. Oh yeah.
Have that framework. But right. But there are but for those that are, one of the things we got out of our graduate program was, there can be a symbol of spiritual intimacy and connectedness from the framework with people of we can connect on what is it, or who is it, where is it, that gives us a sense of meaning or hope.
Right.
Right. Or purpose. What gives us meaning, hope, or purpose. So those can be things that people can, connect with, versus there's a person, who identifies as what particular religious tradition in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even going to that, there's this whole idea around, because I'm about to say, this was like my issue with dating in the DMV from like 2001 to 2015. Coming from my own particular practice and dating women who were of the Christian faith, I ran up across that a lot. This whole concept of being equally yoked, and that, if we're not practicing the same religious faith, we're not equally yoked. And my ideas around what it means to be equally yoked are so far away from just practicing the same religion. It gets more into just how you're lining up overall. But they always came back to that same thing. And I see your eyes getting really bright on this one. What are your thoughts about that? I know you got something there for that one.
So no, that is I don't, I'm really trying to think. So okay, let's do it this way. So yes, correct. In most, what is true, and I'm sure that is what you encountered a lot, because that is the prevailing notion in most mainstream, certainly most mainstream Christian churches. Now, so you will find in Okay, so it's funny because I'm just thinking about so much with that whole understanding. You will find some people who are completely unmoved or unhinged from that notion at all. But you know, that is the so okay, yeah. So let's do it this way. So unequally yoked, then in the Christian context, would mean that most Christians would raise an eyebrow about dating somebody else outside of that faith tradition.
Right.
That's a yes.
Right.
That is correct.
Right.
So that is a common prevailing, belief within the most Christian frameworks.
Yep.
However, a lot of times unequally yoked really also kind of goes into also can go into compatibility.
100%. That's what it is to me.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
Outside of the religious tradition, how compatible or not are we in a bunch of areas?
Right. But that's where they start. They're starting with the foundation. Even before they discover any other issues around compatibility,
right.
That foundation, having that same, not similar, but same religious foundation is key to learning anything else about you.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I'm sure you had a lot of trouble with historically dating. I'm sure because I say that because, I was because I'm a person who, again, I identify as a Christian, but I'm very well taught and trained, and I understand spirituality in a general context, and I respect other people's principles, belief systems, where they stand, etc. For me, as a colleague and friend, when you came on something I did a while ago, I think with men, and you shared, you connect to the, I was like, oh, never met a Black man who connects with the, but it was good for me. It was a good learning experience, and I started learning more about Buddhism as a result.
Oh, right. Thank you, man.
I didn't, honestly, be honest, that I did not know about. So I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once you get into it, you realize that the basic foundational principles of Buddhism and, the Judeo-Christian, Islamic foundations aren't that far apart.
Yeah, true.
It's
very
just,
true.
it's more of the dogmatic principles that play a role in how people perceive who you are versus who they are.
Absolutely.
And that gets back into, again, the definition of spiritual intimacy. So if you're getting away from just the same religious beliefs, because again, even there, like you said, there are so many different denominations that you may have someone who says they're Christian. Okay, cool. We share that same faith, but how do you actually practice it? What scriptures are you adhering to more than others based on, the foundation of your church?
And let me even say this out. This is again another statement bordering me on getting in trouble.
Come on, just get in trouble today, man. That's what you're here. Just get in trouble. It's okay. Just accept it. Yeah.
Get in trouble Friday, right? I don't think this way at all, what I'm about to say, but there are some Christians who believe that because you identify as a Christian, that we all have to, it's funny to me because I'm like, we all have to have the same belief systems about all important social issues, value-based issues, and et cetera. And I'm so far removed from that understanding.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not identify as a Christian, but I'm not a robot. I am an independent thinker. I consider myself really smart, but I don't, there's the complexity for me of so many of these social and value-based issues is too complex to give one just blanket valued stance on certain things. But there are some, and this is probably true in other areas, like maybe some other, or like Orthodox Jews and some other religious sects that are more strict than others. But I don't adhere to the belief that we, kind of like what you say, it's kind of, and it's so true, we don't have to practice it the same way. I'm not a bad Christian if I say I'm a Christian, right? Let me go ahead, right?
Let's not be so black and white, right?
Right. Yeah. Across the board. And I'm only speaking, from within my religious framework. I can't speak to the details of some of the others, but I know, I have a lot of people I know in the Christian framework who, I'm the challenger. I challenge things and people systems, and
here comes Deon. He's gonna have questions.
I will. Right. They know. Mm-hmm. They know respectfully, because there is a lot of black and white thinking.
Right.
And I'm not. It's hard to be in this field and stay in that sort of mode.
Yeah.
Black and white thinking, because we're not trained to think that way.
No, not at all. So let me do this. I'm going to hit you with some of the, when I think about spiritual intimacy, some of the different elements of spiritual intimacy, and just give me some of your thoughts, some of your first reactions when I give these to you, right? And so this is one that you just brought up. When it comes to spiritual intimacy, tell me some of your thoughts around having a common understanding or having a similar worldview. Just that part. What does it mean to have a shared worldview when it comes to spiritual intimacy?
Well, I don't even know if I don't know if that's fully possible. Put it that way.
Okay, why say that?
So we're talking about like with a couple.
Yeah, with a couple. Like I said, I know you work primarily with individuals, because thankfully Deon sends me a lot of his couples. So thank you, bro.
Absolutely.
This is what it means to have good coworkers. But yeah, even when you're working with your individuals and you think about, because you're gonna have conversations with relationships. I don't know how you can work with an individual and not have a conversation with them around relationships in some way, right?
Oh,
and the way that they connect with other people. So I'm thinking about, how do you see the world around you? How do you see your place in the world? So when I say common worldview, just how you see the world and how it functions, because you could be with somebody who says, the world is terrible. Life is horrible. And that impacts their approach to life. That attitude impacts their approach to life. But if you come from a framework and your worldview is that, life is hard, but it's manageable, and there's such beauty and grace in the world, then that's going to be a different worldview. So how is it that for you, from your standpoint, how do you align those two when it comes to, spiritual intimacy and people's connections?
Yeah. So I obviously, one of the things that happens, even like I said, I do more individual these days. I do more individual work. I will do some couples work every now and then, but for the more intense,
you don't want that stress, huh? You just don't want that stress.
No, I don't.
I get it. Believe me.
No, not at all. Not at all. But a lot of the individual people that come in to see me are coming in to work around relational things in their lives with other people.
Right.
And, yes, sometimes those people are having different worldviews with their spouse, friend, family member, you name it. Even different worldview, even with their church or their religious entity.
Right.
Or, they grow up and say, I don't believe that anymore. So the first order of business with the individual is, trying to make sure that he or she has a healthy worldview that kind of guides them, because our worldview matters. How we see things, our perceptions matter.
Exactly.
About thoughts, feelings, and your behaviors, how I perceive myself as an individual,
right? How
I perceive people in my network relationally, how I see the world.
Yeah.
Case in point, right now, what's the war that's happening with between those countries and those regions right now, that is a part of that is affecting and impacting a whole lot of people, and people have a worldview about that and what that means to them and their significance. And they are talking to, let's say, one of my individual clients is in him a significant other or spouse, he or she, and they could have a sense of very good example, actually. They could have a sense of spiritual connectedness and intimacy as a couple based upon what they believe. Definitely in a Judeo-Christian context, there's a lot of background biblically about Israel, for example, and Israel being God's people and last day events. So that's a very good example, because concerning worldview, because you can have two
Yep.
people in a relationship and they could be work towards spiritual intimacy or be spiritually apart based upon how they perceive and believe what's happening now and what that means.
Right. And the reason why this is significant to me is that we have such varied worldviews that can bring conflict into the relationship itself.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you already think about people's different attitudes. You may be with somebody who is, let's say, much more introverted and afraid of the world, and someone else who's much more energetic and positive and out there and an extrovert. Well, you're gonna have challenges in the way that you live together because one person's pulling you in one direction, the other person's pulling you in another one. So when you have more alignment in your worldviews, that only helps you to better navigate different courses with each other because you both see the world in the same way. You have similar attitudes about it. You know, so you need that. I think you need that, especially when it comes to the whole idea around spiritual intimacy. What about shared values when it comes to shared values? So now we're getting away from just your overall perspective on the world around you and the way that you function within it, but getting down into your values and even your principles. How do your values and having shared values play a role in the bond that you're building spiritually with somebody?
Yeah, that's a you know, those things, there's such an intersectionality between that.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I'm gonna use a Judeo-Christian perspective. If I identify as a hardcore Judeo-Christian, and I practice, let's say I practice things kind of very, 1, 2, 3 by the book,
Mm-hmm.
strict. I may have very strong postures around certain things that would be, there's a connection between spirituality, faith, and values.
Right.
They really all connect in a lot of senses.
Right.
So when it comes time for things like, another good example, when it comes time for things like elections, right?
Right.
And then we have this whole thing of for some people, their political party being maybe strongly attached or connected to their religion or
Mm-hmm.
faith tradition as
Mm-hmm.
well. So values are all incorporated in that. Who am I going to,
support?
Example, let's say a husband is a strong Democrat. Let's just say the wife is a strong Republican. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right there, that could be just from that political connectedness, and they're both hardcore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just from that, their value systems around hot button common election issues can either bring them together in a stronger sense, spiritual intimacy, or draw them apart,
Mm-hmm.
because there's such an interconnectedness between a person's spirituality, how they practice it, their value system, and how they connect to others.
Right.
We see it. Unfortunately, people fall out. They disconnect from people. They unfriend people because you believe this person, right? Because you believe this on this. Look, because you believe this on this issue,
we can't be friends no more.
I don't even like you no more.
Right. Yeah. You see that a lot. Yeah, all the time.
Unfortunately. Right. And so actually, some people concerning spiritual intimacy, that will cause some couples to break apart as well, or have distance between them.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Having, again, the reason why we're even having this conversation is because we want to make sure that people are better aligned spiritually and all the different components that play a role in that. And so if your value systems are different, if what you value is very different, then of course that's going to bring conflict into the relationship. So you have to make sure that your values are well aligned. Again, you don't have to be mirror images of each other, but at least recognizing that the things that you value in your world and the values that you hold dear to you are common with your mate. That has to be there too, because if they're not, then again, that's going to just bring more conflict into your relationship. And that leads into principles, right? The principles that we have, our guiding principles, the things, again, you may share the same faith, but the principles that you are guided by within that faith may differ. And so you may be with someone who has a different faith, but the principles are very well aligned. How do you look at principles and particularly the guiding principles and the role that plays in building stronger spiritual intimacy.
Well, even throughout the sacred Christian text, the Bible, there's a lot of principles there on a lot of different issues. There really is. So, if people are practicing those principles, keywords, if they believe in those principles, let's go back, because belief first,
exactly.
How I think, how I perceive. If I believe in those principles, right, and I believe those principles, I endorse those principles, I adopt them, and then I practice them.
Exactly.
And all of that.
Yeah,
all of
you need all of that. You need, because there's a line between having the belief and this is how you're supposed to practice versus actually practicing those principles.
Absolutely. And so that can help build believing those principles and practicing those principles. That can help build spiritual intimacy between couples and make couples more aligned, particularly if couples are in unity, believe a belief system and they endorse it and they both put it into practice. Now, that also, to your point, that also doesn't mean that they both have to put it into practice the exact same way.
Right. But they have to parallel. They have to be somewhat aligned.
Absolutely.
And not running in contrast with one another. Right? There has to be some kind of alignment. And this is all, again, we're talking about alignment overall. So when you have these guiding principles, whether you share the same religious foundation or have a different foundation, the idea is that the principles that guide you along this path have to be well aligned, right? Because again, if they're not there, you're going to run into more problems. You want to have people who different texts are going to have different ways of describing the same thing, right? The same common principles. And so it's just a matter of being able to understand that first. I need to understand what are the principles that help guide you. What mantras do you live by, essentially? What are the words that feed you when you think about, the decisions I have to make? If the principles that you use in order to get to your endpoint are different than mine, well, we know we're going to have conflict there because we're going to have a hard time making decisions together. We're going to have a hard time even, thinking about the places that we're going to end up. So those principles, those guiding principles have to be in somewhat kind of alignment, right? That's what I'm thinking, right?
They do. They definitely do have to be in some type of alignment in order for things to flow more smoothly and there to be less conflict and less tension.
Right. And so, as we kind of get into the end of this, what are some of the things that you would talk to your clients about when it comes to spiritual intimacy and these things that we're talking now, the worldview, the values, the principles, just overall the shared understanding and meanings of life? When you have these conversations with your clients, how do you help them begin to bridge those differences that they have with their mates so that they do become better aligned in these different areas?
So first and foremost is me having an understanding of where they fall at, my clients, with their own spirituality, their belief systems, their values, their principles. It's very important that I know those things. And if I'm not clear about those things, that they educate me about those. That's number one.
Right.
Number two is having clients articulate their spirituality, what spiritual intimacy means for them in the context of their spouse or significant other, and how they individually, I work with them first, how they kind of individually practice those things, how they see the world, their values. Is their spirituality and their sense of their religious tradition, is it infused into their worldview? Right?
Very important, right?
Yeah, because sometimes I have clients who they don't want spiritual integration.
Okay. And these are people who are either practicing a faith or not practicing a faith?
Either.
Okay.
Either. Okay. In session. That's rare. That's rare.
Okay.
I also come in contact with a number of, spiritual religious leaders. So that's a whole nother framework. That's a little different whole
I can imagine
track we would have to go down. But
mm-hmm.
but so and then, when we get into talking about, sometimes there's harmony and unity with them and their significant other or spouse, but sometimes there is a tension and conflict. Sometimes what will happen is one of the parties might even utilize scripture in a way to kind of attack their spouse.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that can happen sometimes.
Right.
So we'll get into that. Case in point, I'll use this for an example. I made a post about this not too long ago. So concerning intimacy and spiritual intimacy and even physical intimacy, right now, and I have a few clients who do connect with the Judeo-Christian perspective, and they're married and they have not been physically intimate with their spouse for 3 or 4 months.
Right.
And so that obviously, and they are, there's no known health issues. There's a lot of other issues and things going on.
Right.
They're in their, mid to late 30s, early 40s. So, there's some relational that the whole intimacy ties in. So what happens in that sense is sometimes when there's arguments or conflicts about that, one or both of those parties will utilize particular religious texts to tell the other spouse what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah, I've heard that one too. Yep.
Yeah, that definitely comes up. But I think it's important, like you said, that both parties either have the same or close. Everything doesn't have to be identical. Have the same or close values, principles, kind of operating instructions, if you would, and that trying to work with their worldview. Now, for me, if I sense that the one of the people I work with, if their worldview is significantly different from their spouses, and they're the majority of what they're dealing with, a lot of the stress and anxiety is conflict in their relationship, then generally, I'll go down the path of asking, is their spouse in therapy independently as well?
Okay.
And have they ever done couples work?
Right.
Right.
Going back to one of the points you just made in terms of the lack of physical intimacy with some of your couples and how someone may rely back on, religious texts as, why they should be doing more. It's almost like they're skipping things there, because I've had those same conversations. And, I go back to, okay, well, what are the other areas of even within spiritual intimacy that you guys are connecting? So you're so worried about the physical bond that you're missing everything else. You're jumping over everything else. So yes, you guys have a very similar or the same religious foundation, but these other areas that we just got done talking about, there are other areas within the spiritual intimacy realm that need to be understood and aligned in order to feel better about each other, in order to strengthen that bond. But then, and this is why we talk about intimacy overall, is because the spiritual intimacy and the intellectual intimacy actually helps to form the bedrock of great emotional intimacy. And so then as you build that emotional bond, the connection that you're feeling through there based off the spiritual intimacy and the intellectual intimacy helps to better inform the physical intimacy. So if you're just going from spiritual directly to the physical, well, you're missing everything else in between that makes the overall connection better and more healthy so that your partner wants to engage more with you. So you need all those different things. They're all interconnected. They're all interdependent, right? You're not going to get to one without having the others playing a role. So you need those. But going to the general point, the idea here too is we want to make sure that people are connecting better spiritually, right? So some of the ideas I have are, one, if you do have different faiths, or even if you have the same faith but different denominations, you go to different churches, visit each other's churches, visit each other's places of worship, just to get a better understanding of where they're coming from. Because the messages they may be getting in their church may be different than the ones that you're getting. And so that helps for you to have a better understanding of what they're being guided by or who's guiding them. So that's one thing. Another thing is, just have conversations. Again, you may have a different understanding of the same text. You may have different foundations, but very similar worldviews. Have a conversation about it. It's a very valuable conversation to have with a potential mate as well as current mates, just so that you can help to better understand where they're coming from and where they want to go. And then more than anything, do your own research. If you guys do have, and that's one thing that for my wife and I, we both come from different foundations. She's Christian. I practice Buddhism. She did her research. She's not somebody who, like the other women I've run into, who are like, well, if you're not a Christian, we can't be together. No, she's like, well, let me understand more about you. So we've had our conversations. She did her research. She understood, and she saw, oh no, we have very aligned principles. And so this is okay. So even if we practice things differently or have different belief systems, we at least live our lives very, very similar. So that was something that she did. So do your own research. Even if someone has the same faith but a different denomination, look into the denomination.
Absolutely.
The idea is to understand them better. And even for yourself, you may want to make sure that you are in a place where you fully understand your own principles. Because some of us are just doing things based off of what we've been told to do and don't really fully understand what it is that we're doing. So you also need to know yourself better so that you can share with other people. People walk into relationships very blindly sometimes, not just of the other person, but of themselves. And so now you're with somebody, they may be practicing things much stricter than you, and you realize, oh, now that's not how I do it. Now that I see what you're doing, I may not be as strict as you are. So now we're going to have our own conflicts within our relationship. So you have to know yourself better, take the time to get to know your mate better, get to understand their practice better. And that's going to help with that spiritual alignment. That's what I'm saying, So as we wrap this up, Mr. Deon Brown, why don't you give us what we call our noble truths, right? This is a chance for you to hit the audience with a couple bullet points, some of the most salient points of our discussion from today's podcast. What are some main things that you want people to walk away from today's discussion?
Sure. So I think, and some of these will echo on, some of the things that you mentioned already as well. But I think that for me, some of the main things that I want people to walk away from is, with number one, within the concept of, spiritual intimacy, that it's very important to get to know your partner and their spirituality, religious framework, their worldview, how they see the world, their guiding principles, to see how close you are both together in the context of spiritual intimacy, or how far apart you are. Right. That's gonna greatly impact and influence the relationship greatly. Number two, I think that it's very important, something we've mentioned a few times today, is that even if we identify with the same belief system or the same religious foundation, it is perfectly okay if we practice some of that differently.
Right.
Perfectly okay.
Right.
That's part of the challenge for people, mentally and emotionally saying it's okay. Right. It's perfectly okay. And we don't have to attack the other person or make them feel bad because they don't do it exactly the way that we do it or endorse it, but it's perfectly okay.
And even worry about what other people think about it.
Yeah.
Because that plays a role too, right?
It does.
Yeah.
It definitely does. That is a struggle for a lot of people that they definitely have to get over. And I think lastly, number three, is that all of those areas of intimacy will have an effect and impact upon the relationship. Definitely when we talk about spiritual intimacy, that's a big foundational area for a lot of people. Like we said, some people struggle with connecting with people, period, if they're not exactly like them,
right,
that way.
Yeah.
But spirituality, spiritual intimacy, emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, and physical intimacy, like you said earlier, they all connect and correlate. And so those things do have to be aligned, some at least, for the things to work well.
Right. Yeah, I agree. When the noble truths I have for this week are, first, understanding the foundation of spiritual intimacy lies in understanding and aligning with each other's worldviews, each other's values, and each other's principles. So you want to make sure that the conversations you're having with each other when it comes to spiritual intimacy, which again is essential for the foundation of your relationship, are around understanding those worldviews that you guys both have, meaning those foundational things and the way that you see yourself in the world, life's meanings and purpose. Have a understanding of the values that people have, the things that they do value and don't value. And again, the principles that guide them in their walk in this world. You want to be able to understand those things about each other and make sure that they're aligned with one another in order to reduce the chances of conflict within your relationship. Also, please challenge your notion of what it means to be equally yoked. If you're only focusing on the foundation of having the common religion, then you're going to set yourself up for a lot of heartache later on, because again, you may have the same religious base, but you may be practicing very differently, which is going to run into issues of compatibility later on. So don't just focus on that. Matter of fact, expand beyond. I would challenge you to expand beyond that, because you may find that there are people, like in my marriage, you may find that there are people who you're better aligned with, who share different religious foundations from you, but have very similar principles. So if you're looking to be with someone, if you're looking to be in a healthy relationship, those principles are necessary to be aligned, more so than I would say the religious foundation. Yeah, you may disagree with me because of what you're practicing and what it is that you need in your world, or what you believe you have to have in your world to move forward within your own religion. But that's just the way that I see things. Don't be so black and white. There's more to the world than just what you think it is. So anyway, that's where I am coming from. Look at Deon, I want to say thank you so much for coming in here today. And John says he wishes he could have been here. Unfortunately, Dr. Hart was not available for us today. Hope he's doing well. Hope the family is doing well. But Deon, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today. Why don't you please tell us a little bit about where people can find you, your website address, as well as on social media?
Sure. You can go to my website, newly formulated, www.djb, that's Derek Joy Boy, djbtherapeutic-solutions.com. On my website, you will see a lot of information about me. You'll see areas of reference to my book, Non-Negotiable Self-Care, my self-care t-shirt line. You'll see various graphics and media and videos of places that I've spoken at, been on panels, spoken in front of groups. You will see testimonials of entities and organizations that I've done one of my 12 signature talks for. You'll see various speaker sheets, but you'll also see a spirituality section. In the spirituality section, you will see things that I'm offering churches and religious institutions and ministries, what I call spirituality clinics. So if a church or religious or spiritual entity wants to book me for a weekend, they can bring me in to be their speaker and do a psychotheological workshop or seminar. They are catered toward 3 areas. They're for men, youth, and church leaders. So you will see information in the spirituality section, a few preaching clips, as well as the particular topic areas that are designated for men, youth, and church leaders.
All right.
And my Instagram. Yep. The self-care therapist, the self-care _therapist.
There you go. It's hard to keep all of that in mind. I know. For me, you can find more about me at kingsoftheheart.com, also TyreekOmariWalton.com. And if you want to find out more about my writing and my old TV talk show and pick up some of these other episodes, you can go to viewsandvibes.com. You can also find me on IG and Facebook and Twitter, all the different social media platforms as Tyreek Omari Walton or just Tyreek Walton. And you can find this podcast on just about every streaming platform there is. So there's no way to avoid us. Look at it again. Deon, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great having you here. And thank you for having me on your shows previously too. Appreciate that. And,
no problem.
Look forward to seeing you in the office in a couple of days.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Take care of yourself. And listeners, you guys take care. Miss you. Love you. See you again. Peace.